Today, Liz Truss speaks out. Will the UK leave the European Court of Human Rights? And should online misogyny be outlawed? This is Politics Live. Joining me, Conservative Chair of the Women and Equalities Committee, Caroline Noakes, Shadow Attorney General Emily Thornberry, Daily Mirror political editor John Stevens and comedian Jeff Norcott. Today, she's back.
Should the Conservative Party put their faith back in you, Miss Truss?
Liz Truss gives her first interview since being deposed as Prime Minister.
Obviously, I've got more time available now to think about these things and make the argument, and that's what I want to do.
Do you think that Liz Truss's approach was the right one?
Well, clearly it wasn't.
Do we need to leave the European Court of Human Rights to stop the small boats? Self-proclaimed misogynist Andrew Tate is in custody in Romania while police investigate allegations of rape and trafficking. But should online misogyny itself be a crime? And we speak to the mum who didn't want her son to celebrate Gay Pride Month and is now suing the school. Well, you heard the former Prime Minister Liz Truss there in the headlines saying she has now got more time on her hands to make her arguments. So that's what she's going to do. Caroline, will you be listening?
No, I don't think I will. I think Liz has a problem because we have a very crowded space full of former Prime Ministers, and we've got Boris setting out his stall on a world stage. We've got Theresa May, very diligent, hardworking, and making some great interventions on a domestic stage. So where has Liz got left to go? I could argue not on this planet. And I'm with Grant Shapps, who has been very clear on this. Should we be listening? No. The markets, as a Tory, I'm taught to trust the markets, and the markets spoke very clearly about Liz's plan, and yeah, I'm inclined to agree. A period of silence would be helpful.
Well, Caroline is very clear on her thoughts on Liz Truss. Will you be listening to what she has to say now she's got more time to make those arguments?
I just think it's extraordinary that she's so unapologetic. I mean, as interest rates continue to rise, and we know that part of that is her fault, people are losing hundreds and thousands because of Liz Truss, and she just swanks back on as if nothing has happened and starts blaming the whatever coalition she says. I think this coalition has Biden in it and the Labour Party, as if it's our fault. I mean, she's completely deluded. And remember, this is the woman who beat Rishi Sunak. You know, I mean, Rishi Sunak is the also-ran who took over after she collapsed. I mean, it's extraordinary. And the level of, I mean, just how deluded she can be is amazing. But, you know, that was who the Conservative Party chose to be our Prime Minister, and she inflicted a huge amount of damage on our country.
I'll come to you in just a moment, John. I mean, Jeff, listening to this, quite a few Conservative MPs have, not Caroline, have sympathy with the tax-cutting agenda that Liz Truss put forward and is still rehearsing those arguments. Will you be listening to what she has to say?
Well, I think I'm old enough to remember when, you know, the revisionism of a PM's time in office often left you time to revise. I mean, we haven't had any time. You know, when people say history will look kindly, we're still in the same football season as we were when Liz Truss was forced from office. And in fairness to her, look, I've blamed the left-wing establishment when I've had a bad gig as well. But the truth is, it didn't go well. It didn't go well, and it's frustrating for somebody like me who does think that the corporation tax going up to 25% is a massive mistake. I think that post-Brexit, post-COVID, we want to attract investment and we want to create jobs. This is probably the worst time in our country's history to do that. But they went on this mad closing down sale of pulling tax cuts out of the hat and then seeming to sort of boast that this was only just the beginning. And as Caroline says, that they spooked the markets, which is, you know, that's really dangerous to the Conservative brand.
Right, well, we are going to listen to a little bit more of Liz Truss, despite what most of you have said so far, and then I'll come to you, John. This is the interview with Spectator TV. You can see it from 5 p.m. this evening. It's with Katie Balls and Fraser Nelson, and this is talking about her economic prospectus.
Was I trying to fatten the pig on market day? Maybe. I believed it was doable, but I knew it would be tough. I just probably didn't realise quite how tough. You would be more delighted than me, Katie,
if there were lots of other people coming forward and making these arguments, I would be more than delighted to have other people go out there and make the case. But the fact is there aren't enough people making the case, full stop.
I did say I'd come to you, but briefly, Caroline, you won't be making the case then.
Well, look, Liz was right when she said we needed growth in the economy, but you cannot have unfunded tax cuts. It scares the markets and you end up in the mess that we were in back in October time.
What do you make of the intervention now? We've got the budget, of course, coming up shortly, in about a month's time.
Well, it's like an incredible list of blame. It was 4,000 words, and you look at the list of people that she blamed in there without taking any real responsibility herself. She blamed the Tory party, the markets, the public not understanding arguments about tax, Joe Biden, the Treasury, the Bank of England. And you just look at some of the arguments she makes in that piece. She says that she felt like she was pushing water uphill because she didn't have the support of the media. Look back at the headlines that were in the newspapers after that mini-budget. At last, a Tory budget, columnists in the Telegraph saying it felt like it was a dream. She had brilliant support from the right-wing media. The reason this didn't work was because it was a shambolic plan.
What about the issue, though, of tax cuts? I mean, are taxes too high right now, Emily?
Yeah, of course they're too high. They're the highest that they've been for 70 years. Yeah. Taxes are too high. Crime is too high. The cost of living is too high. The question is, what are we going to do about it? And the only way in which we can do something about this is by having some growth. And we've had 13 years of a Conservative government that doesn't understand how growth works. And you compare it with 13 years of a Labour government. Right, maybe that's unfair. Let's not compare it with the Labour government. Let's compare it with every other government around the world. Every other country around the world is growing, and we're in recession.
Do you think Labour will actually bring taxes down if they get elected?
Well, historically, there's not much evidence to suggest that that would be the case. But I suppose the danger of what the Tories have done is if you put corporation tax up to 25%, there's room for Labour to come in and even just cut it by 1% and say that they're friendly to business. That's why the corporation tax thing, I think in terms of your pure sort of financial terms, that was the biggest measure. It was the one that they'd announced. It was the one that people had more or less accepted, but they ruined that by going on a spree of other tax cutting.
We want to change the taxation system and we want to make it fair.
But you do want to bring them down, don't you?
Yeah, of course. But on corporation tax, we want to make sure that the corporation tax is roughly the same around the world, that we have a global taxation rate, and that will be fairer, so that there isn't this rush to the bottom. But we also need to, we know that there are plenty of people, particularly the very richest, who don't pay tax, and we need to make sure that we're making sure that people pay their way.
Are you hoping for some sort of announcement, although it looks unlikely, by Jeremy Hunt in the budget along those lines?
Well, look, I want sound public finances. I want a budget that is sensible and pragmatic and recognises the very difficult position that we're in. And I think it is absolutely correct to say that taxes are high, and I would like them to be lower, but I would also like there to be enough money to spend on defence, on nurses' salaries, on transport, etc.
Right. You do sound both very similar, which may be a very good thing, but difficult for voters to perhaps pick between the two when it comes to...
We have our
All right. Well, let's see if we can investigate those further. Let's have a look at this in the Sunday Times. Rishi Sunak's threat to pull the UK out of the ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights, which applies the European Convention on Human Rights. That's the international convention that was brought in to protect human rights and political freedoms in Europe after the Second World War. It's the pledge to leave if new laws that the government is going to bring in a block to 65,000 Channel migrants predicted this year. This was the big piece in the Sunday Times. The response from one Conservative MP was this tweet: pull out of the ECHR. This would restore sovereignty, says Lee Anderson, Conservative MP, to Westminster and stop Strasbourg rulings being enforced in UK law. It would stop the small boats as well. I'm not quite sure why anyone would object to this. If there was a referendum on this, it would be a leave vote. Do you agree with Lee Anderson?
Oh, to me, seldomly. So the reality is, look, we were part of drafting, bringing in the ECHR. I'm not quite sure how leaving the ECHR is suddenly going to stop those boats. You need to have pragmatic solutions with the French. You need to have returns agreements across the whole of the EU in order to act as a deterrent. The boat problem, and we make ourselves a hostage to fortune by pretending that you can stop the small boat crossings quickly and easily. You cannot. And it's going to be an enormous piece of work to put in anything that acts as a deterrent.
So what do you make of the fact that it is one of Rishi Sunak's key pledges, one of his 5 priorities? You agree it may be difficult to achieve?
I think any politician makes themselves a hostage to fortune by pretending you can solve this issue easily. You can't. And I spent 18 months as Immigration Minister when we saw those first crossings and recognised then it was going to be an enormous challenge. I don't think any of us predicted the scale of the problem.
So is the pledge a mistake?
In my view, yes, it is. I think it's going to be incredibly difficult to deliver on.
Do you think it will be delivered on, this idea of the UK pulling out of the European Court of Human Rights in order, in their words, to stop the small boats?
I think that there was a Conservative female MP, so I forget her name, but on a WhatsApp group that was quoted as saying it was a bit of willy waving. I think that was the phrase that she
To coin
used.
a phrase.
To coin a phrase. There's other phrases. But I think that when I look at Rishi Sunak, I don't see a man chomping at the bit to take unilateral action to pull the UK out of a huge supranational body. I mean, the main thing in his sort of political life so far has been the radical agenda of things that he's not going to do. So I don't see that happening. I mean, Lee mentions about a referendum. In a way, that's the point. There's no democratic mandate for this. I'm a big believer that when the public votes for something, we should probably do it. The public haven't voted for this.
Right, but do you think they might? I mean, if it were
Possibly,
a thing, do you think there'd be public support?
Well, this is a massive... This is not the EU. This is a body that came into life after the Second World War.
You're absolutely
People
right.
like Winston Churchill were involved in devising it. So, at the very least, it needs to go to the public.
Right, it's never going to happen, is it? They're not going to do it, Emily. I mean, look at this. Pippa Crerar, a political editor at The Guardian. She's just come out the briefing with Number 10. Rishi Sunak's official spokesman says he is confident the government's small boats plan will both deal with ongoing issue of channel crossings and be compliant with international obligations under the ECHR.
Well, I have to say, when I heard this, my reaction was just, oh, no, not again. I mean, 5 Prime Ministers, they've promised about 20 times to either get rid of the European Court of Human Rights or to get rid of the Human Rights Act. And all the time, you always say, well, what are they trying to distract us from? What's the current problem that they're trying to deal with and they can't deal with properly? And this is it. It's a distraction technique. But also, you just think, what rights have we got that are wrong? What rights do you want to stop us having? I mean, because if they want to change the Human Rights Act or they want to get us out of the European Court of Human Rights, what difference will it make to British people? What rights will they take away? What is the issue? And I've always asked that, and as I say, I've asked it about 20 times in the last 13 years, and they haven't brought us out of the European Court of Human Rights, and they haven't got a new Human Rights Act. They don't seem to have been able to move on it. And as has been said, this is the European Court of Human Rights is something that was inspired by Winston Churchill. This is the party of Winston Churchill, who uses this as a distraction. And what we should be talking about is cost of living, crime.
Is it just a distraction? Is that what this is, Caroline?
I think it's pandering to some of my colleagues who'll think it's a great idea. I think that's what it is, and it's all it is.
I mean, we had legislation last year, didn't we, in order to stop the small boats crisis. That's what they claimed it was going to be.
And Labour have said they want to stop the small boats
Of course
too.
we do, but you can't legislate your way out of this. So you can't pass legislation on human rights or anything. I mean, you passed legislation last year, it hadn't made a difference. They say they're going to legislate again. What they need to do is they need to have a proper policy response, which is much deeper than that and doesn't grab headlines in the same way. But quite frankly, this is such a worn-out issue. They've been banging on about this for years and years and not got anywhere.
And yet it is one of the 5 pledges. And Conservative MPs who've come onto this programme say it is a big issue with constituents. And they'll do anything, almost anything, to ensure that these laws that the government wants to introduce are not held up in other courts.
Yeah, and the other thing is that people's lives are at risk at the moment. That is at the centre of this. People are making extremely dangerous crossings. We're having people drown in the channel. Very desperate people bringing their children over on dinghies. And I think that is why it's so important that we get a workable solution that actually sorts this out, rather than having some pointless argument about the ECHR, which in that article in the Sunday Times, it was talking about how the Tories think this is a wedge issue with Labour and ahead of the next election, it could help win votes. This isn't about winning votes to the Tory party. This is about preventing people drowning at sea.
Well, and it's 65,000 is the prediction. That's the Home Office prediction. I mean, that is an awful lot of people risking their lives. Wouldn't it be prudent to try anything to stop or deter people making that crossing?
And I think the question has to be try anything. What is anything? Is anything the wave machines that we heard about, the floating barriers, the turning them round with gunboats, the pushback? All of those have been thought about, considered and rejected because they're too dangerous. You'll see deaths in the channel. Do any of us really want to see people drown? No, of course we don't. We want to see safe, routes to asylum, and I was the last immigration minister who talked about vulnerable persons resettlement and made a commitment on that front. We want to see more routes, more bespoke routes like the Afghan citizens resettlement scheme actually working. And I think that there are reasons why you might expand family reunion, but to be frank, anything that talks about a simple solution to this is utter nonsense. It's going to take a whole suite of practical, pragmatic steps, many of which are going to involve upstream migration. They're going to involve working with our neighbours. The agreement with Albania, I think that's an absolute step in the right direction, so you can speed up returns, thereby acting as a deterrent. And perhaps we should be seeing an emphasis on more of that sort of scheme rather than...
Rwanda?
No, not Rwanda. Rwanda's an expensive white elephant.
I agree with a lot of what Caroline has just said, and what I was saying before is not that it's wrong to talk about immigration and to talk about a solution to that. What I'm saying is that to have a kind of an easy, like getting rid of the European Court of Human Rights or getting rid of the Human Rights Act is a solution to it. It's not, that is not the simple solution, and there needs to be a thoughtful consideration. There needs to be a number of things that has to be done.
I mean, interestingly, there are Conservative MPs who've written about this, saying it's an existential issue for the party, that the election, the next election, rightly or wrongly, could fall or rise on this.
Well, go to the public, make that argument. I think there's a danger with both parties that they fall into pet areas, is that certain parts of the Conservative Party just pick a fight with Europe, and Labour politicians all too often, for me, have just taken sort of refuge themselves in moral platitudes, really, just saying, you know, the obvious decent thing, which most people feel, but there does seem to be, from the left, sometimes a bit of a dearth of actual practical ideas as to how we do that.
Let's have a look at this headline in the Daily Telegraph. Online misogyny set to be outlawed. Government will use new bill to crack down on abuse of women and girls on the internet. Now, some Conservative peers say tougher rules are needed to target misogyny, specifically online, as part of the online safety bill. John, can you give us a sort of idea of what they're proposing and the government's position on this?
Yeah, so this is legislation that goes all the way back into distant past of the 2019 election manifesto, when the Tories said they were going to make the internet, Britain, the safest place to be on the internet in the world. And then last March, Boris Johnson brought forward this online safety bill. Since then, we obviously had all the chaos of last summer and 2 more prime ministers since then. It's been redrafted a couple of times, and now it's made its way through the Commons. In that bill, it says that online firms, people like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, whatever, would have to enforce their own terms and conditions. And in a lot of their terms and conditions, it says that misogyny is not acceptable. Now, there's a group of... So it's gone through the Commons, it's now going through the Lords. There's a group of Tory peers led by Nicky Morgan, who obviously used to be the Culture Secretary. She's saying it needs to go a step further, that there needs to be this kind of contract with the online firms, that they need to stamp out misogyny, and if they fail to do that, they should be able to be fined up to 10% of their global revenues.
I mean, as it stands now, Caroline, the online safety bill, will it outlaw misogyny or not?
No, I don't think it does at the moment. I think Nicky's amendment will achieve that, and that's why I was with Nicky herself and a group of women from the End Violence Against Women and Girls Coalition in Downing Street, I think probably 3 weeks or so ago, calling for exactly this. I think there is a real problem, is that misogyny online too often tips over into misogyny in real life, whether it be at football matches, whether it be on the streets. And I think there is a massive problem that we have a cultural acceptance that it's OK to be abusive to women. And, you know, it isn't.
Emily?
I think that's right. I mean, I think it's difficult to underplay what a serious problem this is. I think there has been a real change in our culture, and I think it worries me, the attitude of teenage boys. I've spoken to teachers who teach, you know, To Kill a Mockingbird or Othello, or these sorts of kind of classic texts that they've been teaching for decades, and now the reaction of teenage boys to the depiction of women, to the treatment of women, has really changed. And we have to be serious about this, because, you know, it is not acceptable, as I said, but you know, it isn't enough to, I think, to pass a bill that's taken years and years. It's still too weak. It's still not broad enough. And we just need to... I mean, I don't want to be here in a few years' time and find something terrible has happened in one of our schools, you know, and for people to go, oh, we should do something about it. No, we need to do something about it now.
But do you think it's too weak, the bill as it stands? Does it need this extra layer of legislation, tightening up, if you like?
Well, I think it's interesting, you know, when I'm on a place like Instagram, when I get female followers, I'd say 90% have their profiles as private, right? And there's a reason for that. I think that it's very, as somebody that is cautious about the role of the state in policing ideas, language and behaviour, this is such a sensitive area, really, isn't it? Because I think misogyny as an idea is one thing, misogynistic abuse is an extension of that. So is the purpose of the bill to police misogynistic abuse, or is it to police misogynistic ideas or thought?
No, I think we want people to be able to have free speech. We want to be able to debate ideas and thoughts.
So what kind of things would it shut
me
down then, Caroline? What kind of things would it shut down?
OK, so maybe it would shut down things like men online threatening to rape me and Emily.
But that's it.
That happens
Caroline,
already.
That's already illegal. I wasn't for at any point suggesting that would be something that I was against. What I'm saying is, we were talking just now about misogyny becoming illegal. So I was just wondering if you could offer a distinction between misogynistic abuse and ideas that were sort of inherently sexist.
And I think that's a really interesting question. The year before last, the Law Commission looked specifically at whether misogyny should be a hate crime and came to the conclusion that it shouldn't. And I agreed with the government then, and I was prepared to accept it.
Why?
Because the Law Commission were very clear that they thought you needed specific targeted legislation. So
that's exactly what I was asking you.
Make public sexual harassment a specific crime. Now, we watched the government drag their feet about that. They've now conceded that point. We've got Greg Clark's bill coming through the House. But I think there are real challenges around how you can secure free speech online at the same time as cracking down on the sort of abuse that women in public life, female celebrities, get every single day.
Right, isn't that the sort of concern, though, that Jeff is expressing? Where is that line? I mean, clearly saying something like threatening to rape you is beyond the law. It's criminal.
Illegal.
But what will misogyny, what will it include? I'd be interested in hearing some examples about what would be outlawed then online.
I think it shouldn't be legal for people to say that, for example, that I should shut up and then there be a string of abuse which is just, and I won't repeat it, but is all just sexualised and is about the fact that I'm a woman, that because I'm a woman I ought to shut up. That, for example, I think is clear misogyny. It's not necessarily threatening to cut my head off, but it is an attitude and an aggressive way of wanting to shut me down and to stop me talking, and a fear, therefore, of frankly mouthy, powerful women.
Jeff?
Well, I think it's interesting that you said, Caroline, that you were against the legislation that made misogyny a hate crime, but you seem to be sort of expecting social media companies to do something that you weren't willing for government to do.
Look, my position's changed. It was 18 months or so ago that the Law Commission review came in and they said it shouldn't be a hate crime. I was prepared to accept that then. You know what? It's got worse. I'm not seeing misogynistic abuse decrease. It's going up. You've got individuals like Andrew Tate who are using it as a tool to drive their own sort of weird university, I use the term loosely, and encouraging teenage boys to subscribe to that. I talk to head teachers, as Emily does, the whole time, who say they have a real challenge in PSHE with making young people understand the importance of respecting each other. I was talking to a group of girls who were telling me that in a pupil inclusion unit, a poster emphasising the importance of consent was ripped down every single day. And I just don't see the situation improving.
Do you think this will change it, though, Jeff?
I mean, it could do, yeah. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's a really crucial piece of legislation, and all the things that you've both spoken about are things that I see and have detected. And you allow, these people that have come into this space of debate are essentially dangerous people. I've got a young son myself, but I just think that whenever government is dealing with something that is essentially subjective, which is what people think about the difference between the sexes, and of course any kind of misogynistic abuse is wrong and should be illegal, but holding those ideas, that's what I'm talking about, is the difference between those spaces.
I think that government does have a role. I don't think we agree on this, but I think government has a role in terms of its leadership. And I think that also if you run one of these companies, I think you should take responsibility for what's online, particularly the more extreme stuff, especially when I think we are shifting in a very dangerous way as a society.
I mean, looking at this, you've mentioned Andrew Tate a couple of times. In the Sunday Times, the schools rush to enrol on courses tackling Andrew Tate's toxic masculinity. Andrew Tate being the social media influencer many people think was created really by social media. He's in custody, as is his brother. They deny the allegations of rape and trafficking. But why does he appeal, it seems, to so many boys and men?
Well, I suppose on one level, there's two strands to what he does. I mean, he's a self-confessed misogynist.
Yes.
A lot of stuff that he says is... I mean, before any of his followers give me grief, he said that himself. Right?
Yeah.
there's two strands. There's that side of it, which is pretty toxic, and then there's the other side, which is where he just talks in frank ways about the realpolitik in the battle of the sexes, right? He'll say things like women are attracted to men who are tall, powerful, wealthy, which will be things that for a lot of people will resonate in their lives. So he perhaps establishes a degree of trust by saying simple things, which perhaps in circles like these we might be cautious about. But then the problem is what he then does with that trust is takes impressionable young men into frequently some very dark places.
I think I'm uncomfortable with the phrase toxic masculinity because it kind of gives the impression that masculinity is per se toxic, and it's absolutely not.
I definitely don't think that. Emily.
No. I mean, but it's by sticking the two words together. You know, I think there has to be space for boys to understand.
Well, is there space though?
Well,
is there space? Because it seems that a lot of the reaction to this is because boys, young men, don't have the space to navigate relationships or contact with women.
I agree. I agree so much. And I think that there is a real problem, for example, for teenage boys who want to have a role model outside the family because, you know, they're growing up. And where do they get those role models when there are not teachers around, where there are not youth groups, where there are not the adults in their life, the adult males in their life in the way that there needs to be? And yes, I do think that it's a difficult time for boys, and we need to be able to not just condemn what's wrong, but we need to fill that space. I agree.
John?
I think that the problem here is that social media firms have had the opportunity to clean up their platforms, but we've just gone round and round in circles. We're talking about extremist content, you know, Islamist extremist content, right-wing extremist content. These issues come up and up and up, and then social media firms say, yeah, we are tackling it, and the reality is they haven't done a good enough job at doing that. And, yeah, I've got no doubt the government doesn't really want to get involved in this stuff, but it's having to because, as you're saying, this kind of misogynistic content is getting worse, and despite all the promises, despite all the kind of adverts on the tube station downstairs about how social media firms are being really proactive and doing this stuff, in the reality, they're not doing enough at all. I
mean, how do you tackle or counter the sorts of things that are being put forward by people like Andrew Tate in a social media world?
Well, it's not something that the government also... I mean, it's interesting at the moment, TikTok have got a campaign which I think they've realised that parents are worried about this, and they say, we take security very seriously. So I think that in the same way that, you know, prior to the sugar tax, suddenly, mysteriously, companies would go, oh, I think we're going to reduce the amount of sugar in our drinks. I think that they sense that something is within the pipeworks here. So I think that whatever this legislation is, I think that there will be good outcomes in terms of simply having the debate.
Right, this is another headline connected to it. It was an article in last week's Telegraph on online safety bill about backbench MPs and former ministers calling for strict age checks on social media and adult sites to prevent children accessing pornography. Rebel Tory MPs demand tougher laws to stop children viewing pornography online. You're one of those.
I was about to say, I think I'm one of them, aren't I? And we saw...
I think you are.
a really horrible piece of... research that I think was carried out by the Children's Commissioner, looking at the average age at which children are viewing pornographic content online. And more disturbing, from my perspective as chair of the Women and Equalities Committee, was the assumption that women enjoyed violent sexual acts to a higher degree than men did. And this is driving a really warped kind of perspective of what constitutes normal adult relationships. And if our young people are learning about sex from porn, from free to view porn channels, if they're sharing pornographic material on Snapchat and whatever other platforms they're using, we have a massive problem, and we need to do more to protect young people.
And how would it work, Caroline? How would you actually ensure that age verification can be effective? Because the young people I know are pretty good at finding ways around the system.
Yeah, they are. They're very good. And that's the real challenge, isn't it? That they will be better at getting their way round anything than us adults can dream of putting in place to stop it. But there's all sorts of clever tech. So it's not just about age verification. There are some platforms that can identify how old somebody is by the way that they type. And I think we have to use every sort of technological advantage available to try and protect children. And I don't think you'd have to be a pretty warped person to disagree with that.
Right.
I think that that's the very least any parent would expect social media companies to do. I've got to say, with the porn thing, I mean, there are the instances of erectile dysfunction in young men are going up dramatically. And I think that there's a fundamental difference between a generation of men that existed before that time and a generation where their whole understanding of sex and expectations of sex have been formed in this way. And I think, as you say, like as the technology improves, that's the sort of thing we've got to seize to enforce it more rigorously.
Emily?
Yeah. I mean, I think my worry about age verification is that it might be in some way seen as a silver bullet, and I know that isn't what you think, but I don't want to let anybody off the hook on that, because I do think that they can still be sharing, on other platforms, So what do you do about them sharing it on Twitter or Reddit or whatever the other sites are, that so that they can get round it. That's the issue, and it kind of takes us back, I think, to a sort of an underlying theme, which is that there is a responsibility within schools, and age-appropriate education in schools on sex and relationships is absolutely vital, particularly at a time like this. And thank goodness that's the law.
Right, let's have a look at this in The Sun. Banter bouncers is the headline. Free speech fears as pubs could be forced to hire bouncers to police boozy chats under new laws. Yes, you're laughing.
It just sounds like a nickname for a bloke in your group that you don't like. Oh, here comes the banter bouncer. It's just a ridiculous... I don't think that there's anyone realistically saying that there's any chance of this happening. We don't have it for other things which are illegal or unpleasant. I don't honestly think we're going to have it for this.
Do you have a fear, John?
I don't have a particular fear of this, no. I think that the fear may just be kind of restricted to the postcode where The Sun is produced, and there may not be many people around the country who actually think this is actually going to happen.
Just briefly on the age verification, do you think this is something that will just happen but might not work that well?
Well, we know before we had kind of age restrictions on people can put restrictions on their home internet, they can do it on their mobile phones, but the reality is you look at things like WhatsApp, you can share a video with someone else on WhatsApp with a WhatsApp group. WhatsApp's got no idea what's actually in that video, and you can have whatever restriction you want. You can have someone have to put in their credit card details. If you've got children using mobile phones, they're going to access this stuff in some way.
Caroline, I mean, is there also a problem about that much data being handed over in order to get that age verification?
Well, I can remember years ago coming up with a proposal with Karen Bradley, at one time Culture Secretary, about could we not use credit card verification? So actually you can have a debit card at a young age, but a credit card you have to be over 18, and charge people a penny to look at Pornhub or other sites are available. And, that then gives you a tag of who it is doing it and what credit card. And we're not actually taxing porn, are we? We're just putting a notional charge on it. I don't know whether that's too simplistic a solution, but it certainly is apparent that we have an explosion of children accessing porn.
All right. If you want to watch more discussions, and of course you do, from previous episodes of Politics Live, do go to the Politics Live page on BBC iPlayer, where there are discussions about everything from the NHS, sending tanks to Ukraine, and the record profits being made by energy companies. Let's move on and have a look at this headline in The Times. Devout Christian claims son 4 was forced to go to LGBT Pride Parade. Izzy Montague, supported by the Christian Legal Centre, is suing her son's school on the grounds of direct and indirect discrimination, victimisation and breach of statutory duty under the Education Act 1996 and the Human Rights Act 1998. Now, it's the first time a UK court is scrutinising the legality of imposing LGBT ideology on primary schools. We have Izzy Montague with us, the mother who is taking her son's primary school to court. Izzy, why are you taking this action? Izzy, can you hear me? I think the line might have gone down. We'll come back to Izzy in just a moment. But first of all, your response to the fact that she is taking the school or suing the school for her son being made to take part in an LGBT parade, a celebration in Pride Month.
Well, I think it's very sad, and I would like to see age-appropriate sex and relationship education for all children, making sure that they learn that love is love and that we should respect everybody, regardless of their gender, their sexual orientation. And I think we've seen from Mrs Montague some years ago on a different television channel suggesting that children shouldn't be taught, shouldn't have gay ideology taught to them. Well, of course they should, and I think it's absolutely right that schools should be empowered to do that in an age-appropriate, respectful way.
Izzy, I think we've got the line to you now. Why are you taking this action against the school? Oh, maybe it's just me that Izzy can't hear, or the line keeps going down. Well, while we're trying to establish Izzy Montague...
No.
Oh, she can't hear. I think that would be no to. Can you hear the studio? Emily?
I think that... I think that it's right that we begin, as we have done. You know, we've been talking throughout this programme about the importance of education and the importance of understanding one another and the importance of proper education when it comes to age-appropriate sex and relationship education. It's important people understand about healthy relationships, and gay relationships are part of that. So, I mean, I think, you know, that's the curriculum and that's what we teach in schools. I think that it would be inappropriate for teachers for parents to start saying to teachers, I want to see your lesson plan before you teach this lesson. I want to have the opportunity to veto what it is that you're teaching, and that doesn't really work. So, I mean, obviously, we do have a system whereby people can opt out of religious education.
Well.
And that was kind of part of the establishment of schools was, you know, you could opt out of assemblies. But equally, you can opt out of school trips. You know, you have to give consent for your school trip. So you have to, but no, you can't start parents saying you're allowed to teach this, but you're not allowed to teach that. If we're teaching the curriculum, we're teaching the curriculum.
Well, should there be an exemption, Jeff? That's certainly Izzy Montague, without paraphrasing her. But her thoughts are that there should have been an exemption. It was compulsory for her son to take part in this, and he's 4 years old.
So is that what they're trying to establish in the case? Has that been proven beyond doubt?
No, this is...
That's what's tricky about it. I mean, I can speak in more general terms and say that, you know, anyone with young kids, I think Caroline's right, is like you want your children to be educated about the world that they live in. The detail, perhaps, the level of detail. There was some stuff on anatomy the other day that my son was being taught. I was surprised at the level of detail, I'll be honest. I would say that I think things that happen within the school and outside of the school feel like different spheres, and if the child was fought at that time, it feels like it's the parent's call when it's outside of school. Wouldn't be a problem for me. It wouldn't be a problem for me at all, but it still feels like that is the parent's sphere.
I'm going to give it a third go. Izzy, can you hear me now? It's Jo Coburn in the studio.
I can hear you.
Hey, third time lucky. I don't know if you've heard the discussion thus far, but tell us why you're taking this action against the school.
Primarily, it's more to do with the fact that schools can enforce whatever they choose to do. Some of these ideologies that they have are quite deep and quite disturbing, and the fact that parents can't opt to choose not for their children to be learning the worldview according to the schools. You know, that's why there has to be, a fashion that parents can go through, that they can say, well, no, I don't want my child to learn this.
Right, now you say it's the school, but actually the statement from the primary school is, as a school we have a duty as stated by the Department for Education and reinforced by the Early Years Foundation Stage Framework to promote fundamental British values as part of the spiritual, moral, social and cultural development of our pupils, and that includes important values of tolerance, inclusivity and equality. So this is what the Department of Education has set out. Your school is merely following the guidelines.
Absolutely not. There's no laws that says that the school has to teach certain subjects in the way that they can teach it. Schools have to remain neutral. They have to teach facts. They have to teach truth. A lot of these subjects that there are issues that they're teaching are ideologies. It's not simply just saying, OK, this is happening in the world. Well, these are values. It's about ideology, telling children that this is what it is and this is what is correct, and your views or your family's views or your community's views are incorrect.
Izzy, just stay with us. Caroline, what do you say in response to that? That these are ideologies?
Well, I simply disagree that being gay is an ideology, and I think the important part of the Department for Education's statement is that it's about tolerance and inclusivity, and I'm sure that every school is championing that, certainly in my constituency, and that's what they should be doing. And it's not about deeply disturbing ideology. I entirely reject that as any sort of factual way that PSHE is being taught in our schools.
Izzy?
I mean, if you ask some of the teachers who champion for this, what their views are. So if we go into, let's say, gender ideologies or relationships, it can, these are lifestyle choices. if you have an ideology that a lifestyle choice is correct and there's nothing wrong with it, and someone disagrees with it, that is an ideology. You're saying that your ideas are correct, and then you're passing your ideas on to children. Why I say it's disturbing is because some of this is verging on what is truthful or not. So telling children that, some children have 2 mummies and 2 daddies, that is, a deep disturbing ideology that isn't correct.
All right,
No child has 2 mums and 2 dads.
Caroline,
All children have a mum and a dad.
Caroline?
Well, of course you can have children with 2 mums and 2 dads, and I think it's wholly disrespectful of Mrs Montague to pretend that gay relationships don't exist and that they're some sort of ideology. They are reality, and I think we should respect those families where children are being brought up in loving homes.
What about, Jeff, the idea that parents have some redress? There are exemptions, as you were saying, Emily, on religious grounds to attend certain things at schools. Is this going a step too far?
Well, as you say, if that exists within the school, if you can withdraw from an assembly inside of a school, it seems, likely that people will be able to withdraw their children from activities outside of it. But there's 2 threads to this. There's what Miss Montague is saying in relation to that and what's being taught in schools. And I think there are a lot of people that I just want my child to grow up with a rounded view of what the world is and how it tends to operate for most people. And I think that when she says that people are being taught, she sort of seems to be alluding to the idea that you can biologically have 2 mummies. I don't think anyone would say that that's possible. But what you're talking about is their living situation. So if they can't say they've got 2 mummies, how else do you describe it? I don't think there's any other way of describing it.
I mean, should these things be compulsory?
I'm not sure that getting 4-year-olds to take part in some sort of LGBT parade is necessarily the most helpful way of teaching people about tolerance and diversity. I'm not actually sure how that achieves that aim, but the idea that Izzy was saying about how being gay is a lifestyle choice, I think that is offensive and that is wrong.
Emily?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've got anything to add, really.
Right.
I think that, we have a curriculum. Thankfully, it is one whereby sex education is compulsory these days, which I think is a good thing. It has to be age appropriate, but we need to make sure that children are educated thoroughly and in the round.
Right. Izzy, do you accept what John said, that actually some of the things that you have said, certainly about being gay being a lifestyle choice, is offensive?
I don't think it's offensive at all. I think this is where the problem is that we do have a problem with hearing the truth. We have come so far away from we use a lot of words that sound very nice, and we actually are forgetting what the truth is. If you have a relationship and you've got an equal relationship to decide of who you want to be with, it's called a choice, and therefore you might have a strong feeling to have a relationship with someone of the same sex or the opposite sex, but you do have the overall decision to make a choice on what you believe is right, and that's why it is called a lifestyle choice.
Well, your child will have a choice between what they're taught at school and what they're being taught at home, and it will be for them to decide which ideology, if that is what it is, but it isn't, they go with. Right.
I mean, in the end, what are you scared of exactly, Izzy?
Scared? I mean, there's no fear, absolutely no fear whatsoever. It's about your human right. You have a right to raise your children in the way that you choose to believe in. That's a human right for everybody, not just for a few, but for everyone. And my human right in this particular school, it just wasn't adhered to.
All right.
And I think it's important that all parents have that human right, validated.
Izzy Montague, thank you very much. We've only got a little time left. Just a very quick question around the panel. In TikTok, which we were talking about very briefly earlier, banned or not, Caroline?
No.
No. Emily? What? Should be banned or not? TikTok, that's certainly what one of the...
No.
No?
No, I'm on it. I use it.
You're on it? You use it?
It seems like they've banned me. My followers haven't got a break.
That's all we have time for today. From all of us here, bye-bye.